Okay, live stream is up. Well, it looks like it's time to be able to start. So good evening, everybody, and thank you for all joining us. This is the Dunn County Board of Supervisors meeting, Wednesday, July 29th, 2020. And we'll start by calling the meeting to order, and we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
with
with liberty and justice
for all.
Okay, thank you. We'll have the clerk call the roll.
Supervisor Johnson,
Here.
Chairman Bartlett,
Here.
Supervisor Headland,
Here.
Supervisor Score,
Here.
Supervisor Steen,
Here.
Supervisor Zons,
Here.
Supervisor Gary Bjork,
Here.
Supervisor Maves, Supervisor Maves, Supervisor Maves, can you hear us?
Unmute.
Okay, I'm gonna trade with Larry.
Supervisor Maves,
Now what?
He can wave.
We can acknowledge that Supervisor Maves is in
Okay, he
attendance.
can hear us.
Supervisor Quinn,
Yeah, here.
Supervisor Rogers, Supervisor Rogers,
Yes.
Supervisor Anderson, Supervisor Anderson,
Here.
Supervisor Kinnear,
Here.
Supervisor Crumry,
Here.
Supervisor Calabrese,
Here.
Supervisor Keeter,
Here.
Supervisor Vogel,
Here.
Supervisor McCullough,
Here.
Supervisor Story,
Here.
Supervisor Vandermeulen, Supervisor Vandermeulen,
I do not see him on the list.
Supervisor Niehoff,
Here.
Supervisor Morehouse,
Here.
Supervisor Kennedy,
Here.
Supervisor Tripp,
Here.
Supervisor Prochnow,
Here.
Supervisor Jensen, Supervisor Jensen,
Think his audio is, oh no, that's Carl.
so Supervisor.
Supervisor Jensen was one of the first persons to join us.
Yeah, he's waving to us.
Okay.
Okay.
And I see Supervisor Vandermeulen joined us. Supervisor Larry Bjork,
Here.
Supervisor Bauer,
Here.
Supervisor Leno,
Yep, made it.
and Supervisor Hartung.
Here.
All right, we have a quorum. Approval of the minutes.
I so move.
Was that Supervisor Steen?
Yes.
And a second, Supervisor Anderson. Any discussion on the minutes?
You can adjust it. See ya.
If
I got
not,
one question.
okay, Supervisor Bjork.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I was just going over the part with the Nature Conservatory. So when it talks about county board or county being reimbursed, does that mean the work that we do in making the application?
If I remember right, we did not get reimbursed for doing the application of it, administering the paperwork for it. But I can check with Dan Prestabach and get back to you.
Okay, that's all I wanted to know. I don't want to be a problem with the project. I was just wondering if we did the application, if we were repaid.
Some grants we get reimbursed for the administrative work. I don't think that was the case with this one. Any other discussion or questions? If not, all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried. Presentation of petitions, memorials, and other communications.
So we have a letter that was dated July 27th, 2020 to Chairman Bartlett, County Board of Supervisors. Dear Supervisor Bartlett, we are writing to request that the Dunn County Board of Supervisors support the Dunn County Health Department in issuing a mask wearing requirement for county citizens to help reduce the spread of COVID-19 virus in the county. The request is in keeping with a recent message by the Federal Centers for Disease Control that called on all Americans to wear masks in order to prevent COVID-19 spread. The message cited recent case studies that showed masks reduce the spread of infection. CDC Director Dr. Robert Redfield said that masks are one of the most powerful weapons we have to slow and stop the spread of the virus, particularly when used universally within a community setting. All Americans have a responsibility to protect themselves, their families, and their communities. We have seen a significant increase in the number of positive cases in Dunn County, which have tracked with large increases in the state of Wisconsin. This means immediate action is needed to implement effective measures to reduce COVID-19 spread in the county. We are doing everything possible at our respective institutions and workplaces to encourage the diligent use of masks and adherence to other safety protocols. However, in a community that includes a major university, branch of a technical college, 4 school districts, large industries and businesses, and many small businesses and nonprofits, we firmly believe a mask wearing requirement in Dunn County is critical to economic vitality. Most importantly, we believe that such a requirement will be instrumental in helping to keep all county citizens safe and healthy. Thank you for your time and consideration of this request. Signed, Catherine Frank, Chancellor UW Stout, Randy Knack, Mayor, City of Menominee, Catherine Dutton, Executive Director, Stepping Stones, Dr. Ash Hawk Rai, President and CEO, Prevea Health, Joe Zadowski, District Administrator, School District of the Menominee Area, Richard Helmers, MD, Regional Vice President, Mayo Clinic Health System, Northwest Region, Jason Craig, Regional Chair of Administration, Mayo Health Clinic, Northwest Region, Pam White, Regional Wife Nursing Officer, Mayo Health Clinic System, Western Region, Dustin Dubuque, Executive Director, Downtown Menominee, Jennifer A. Strong, MD, Family Medicine Physician at Marshfield Clinic, Menominee Center, Eric Wright, Superintendent, Elk Mountain Area School District, Chief Atkinson, Menominee Police Department, William Yinks, Superintendent, School District of Colfax.
Thank you. Do you have anything else?
I do not.
All right. I would like to mention that we have someone retiring, and although she has asked that we not make a big deal out of it, I would be remiss not to acknowledge that one of our longest tenured employees is retiring after 47 years with the county. Jeannie Stevenson, our child support director, is retiring on August 3rd. I know you all join me in expressing our gratitude for her many years of dedicated service and wishing her well as she starts a new chapter in her life. This is probably something like this is one of the biggest things that I miss, that we can't be in person and we can't thank people for their years of service. Many of them have become more than just acquaintances, somewhat friends. And I wish we could have a party like we usually do. It's like the when we had the election for the county board and the outgoing supervisors, we never got a chance to thank them and properly. And I wish we could do that. It's the biggest thing I miss, probably. Moving on. Appointments. There was only one this month, local emergency planning committee. And the term expires 2021, and it's Kristen Essick. And that's a chair's appointment, so I don't need confirmation. Moving on. Report of the county manager. Mr. Miller, you are up.
Thank you and good evening, everybody. As it has been for the past 5 months, the first item in front of us is the update on COVID-19. Everybody hopefully receives the 3 times a week email that we send out from the staff level assessment of what we're doing and what we're experiencing as far as COVID-19 cases. And surprising nobody, we've more than doubled the number of cases in the month of July than when we first started. The trajectory is going up. We have in attendance this evening, Katie Gallagher, our Director of Public Health, and with the chairman's permission, I'd like her to address the board.
Yes. Please do.
Good evening, this is KT. I apologize, my internet is a little unstable, so I'm going to keep my camera off. We are in a public health crisis, and I don't use that term lightly. Today, we will have 100 confirmed Dunn County residents that are positive for COVID-19. When we started, we had a really low rate of growth, and we enjoyed a low number of cases, even holding steady at 29 for just over 3 weeks. And at that time, we were seeing people with really small circles. We were doing contact tracing where we were seeing groups of 1 and 2. Oftentimes we were seeing and tracing the contact back to a known positive or an area of travel where we had significant community spread. In the last 5 weeks, like the county administrator shared, we have seen over a doubling. We're actually seeing a doubling every 3 weeks or so. And we are definitely on target to see an additional doubling from 29 to 59, and then 58, 59 to 118 at the end of another third week. So on the 5th of this next following week, that's only 2.5 cases a day. And we have been averaging 2 to 5 cases a day for the last 2-3 weeks. The other big difference that we've seen is that circles have stopped being small. When we do the contact tracing, we are seeing groups of family members and groups of friends get together to where we're seeing 8 to 20 contacts. And many of those contacts are then converting to a positive case. We are seeing, we're doing the contact tracing and we're seeing it, we're continuing to see workplace exposures, but then we're seeing significant spread within a family unit, or we're seeing household celebrations or gatherings, or we're seeing close contacts and social gatherings, including not as extensively as neighboring counties, but including cases associated with bars and restaurants. One of the things that makes this a public health emergency is that at any moment, we could see a significant uptick because of a cluster of illnesses. We're currently working a facility investigation, and we are working to get community testing associated with that investigation. That possibility of changing nearly overnight from a slow burn of cases to a wildfire is a reality, unfortunately, many of our adjacent counties are seeing. St. Croix had 25 cases before 3:30 yesterday. I heard today that Barron County, due to a facility investigation and some other clusters of illnesses, had over 70 cases today. So when I say it's a public health crisis, I need you to know that we need to be nimble, because we run the risk of being overwhelmed if we're not. I have increased my staff to do contact tracing from 4 public health nurses at the outset to 11. I've increased the administrative time to manage the labs coming in through WEDS from just 10 hours a week to what we're trying to get, which is almost 40 hours a week, so that we can address the public health need here in Dunn County. We need to be nimble because our situation is going to change here rapidly with a return to in-person instruction with schools and the increase in our population with college students. We need to be able to find the cases, do the contact tracing, and prevent community spread. This is a public health emergency. We also need to be nimble because the science is changing. We are watching science happen in real time. Oftentimes not fast enough, but so much faster than we've seen in epidemics past. And we need to be able to respond to that, to have effective community interventions at levels that are needed, but not more than needed. We're doing our best in public health, and we have heard from the community that we are appreciated. And that feels fantastic. But we want to be able to do the best we can for this marathon that we have undertook. And I appreciate your support to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Miller, do you have more?
No, just not much more. We are continuing to track it. staff level COVID-19 response team meets still 3 times a week. It always features an update on the number of confirmed cases of COVID-19. It has been somewhat alarming. At the beginning of June, we thought maybe we had gotten over the worst of it. Here in July, it's really skyrocketed. The experts are telling us that we are in the middle of the first wave. This isn't a second wave. So I'm pleased to say that the response that we've had from our public health department, from this county board to date has been effective, I think, in helping slow the spread. But the situation has not resolved itself, and for the foreseeable future, it is not going to. We need to remain vigilant in terms of our response. Unless there are any questions on that point, Mr. Chairman, I'll move on to the next topic.
I don't see any questions, so go ahead.
Mr. Rogers has his hand up.
Oh, Supervisor
How many
Rogers.
How many hospitalizations have we had?
Sure. So we're running consistent with the state average. So we run around 9% of our cases being hospitalized. There is a lag between new infections and hospitalizations. So with our most current week worth of cases, we don't have any new hospitalizations, and the cases from that were hospitalized last week have both been released. To answer your question directly.
Any other questions?
So how many was that? I missed that. How many hospitalizations do we have?
So as of last week, we had 8 hospitalizations, so running at about 9%. And we have not had new hospitalizations this week with our new cases.
Any other questions? Okay.
Thank you. Moving on then, this is the time of year when we begin to get into the budget season. Included in the materials distributed to you is the first pull together of the fiscal year 2021 budget and levy status. We have summary sheets that were distributed via email to everybody. What we normally do is we get the budget requests from each of the departments and divisions, along with requests for new or changes to positions within the departments and divisions and any capital improvements. We pull those together, and that is what we're presenting tonight. Keith Stry, our Chief Financial Officer, is in the meeting, and I'd like, again, with the chairman's permission, to turn it over to him.
Yes, go ahead, Keith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Everybody hopefully received the email I sent out last night about 5 o'clock with the links to the detailed budget requests as they stand as of today, or when I distributed them yesterday, as well as 3 attachments with some very high level summaries. And that's really the intent for tonight, is just to hit the highlights of those, to introduce the budget to you for the first time. And then it's at your discretion and time to go ahead and open those links to look at the individual detailed requests from the departments and divisions. That information will be used by the standing committees to review the budgets in detail for the departments that report to each of the standing committees during the month of August. Then they will present or make a recommendation to the executive committee for their consideration in September. So I'll hit the highlights here of the budget. And the first thing is the draft 21 budget summary as of today's date. It's a summary Excel spreadsheet that was sent out in the packet of emails, or the email I sent out. At the expenditure level, if you compare the 2021 initial requests that are presented tonight, the requests are at 88.6 million. If you compare that to the 2020 adopted budget from the county board, it was 83.9 million. a significant portion of that is capital requests that are submitted for this year. That was another attachment that was included of the three, was a list of the capital project or equipment requests and the funding sources for each of those, including the budgets that they were included in. So that is one of the attachments, and certainly please take a look at that. And as you go through your budget reviews, the total request for capital expenditures alone was $9.2 million. And the funding sources were, multiple debt at 3.2 million, tax levy at just over 160,000, fees and other funding sources. So that will be some of the details that will be discussed at the standing committee level and as things move forward in the process. I also want to point out in the sheet that I provided to you, it includes on the right half of it, the high level categories of different revenue sources. And I won't go through all of them in detail. That's for later dates, but I will point out in there the 2021 levy, the initial identified request is a total of $23,211,000 applicable to the county's operations. Last year's levy limit maximum was just over 22 million. That number for this year won't be known until the first or second week of September because that's released by the state. So what that means is at this point, comparing to the limit that was in place last year, we would have to make adjustments to the tax levy funding source by $1.1 million. It also points out in the spreadsheet that there's approximately 1.6 million overall in fund balance applied. And like I said earlier, in the capital, 3.2 million in borrowing. For those that were at the executive committee meeting or listening in or watching that, you may recall that we reported a little over 2 million. At that point, we still were settling out the initial request for presentation tonight. And a majority of the adjustments, frankly, were related to projects that were like a roof replacement, a judicial significant project. You're not going to fund that with tax levy. So those are some of the adjustments that brought that number down. So third and final point that I wanted to cover is the third attachment, which was a 2021 budget summary, which essentially highlighted the staff or position requested changes. Sorry. And this really just gives to you a summary of where people had made requests for additional positions or adjusting positions. So again, these will be reviewed by the standing committees for their recommendation. Are there any questions on the summaries before I wrap up? Hearing none, next steps in the process, like I said, the standing committees should include in their agendas for the month of August to review budgets from all their reporting departments. County Manager Miller and I will be at the meetings, one or both of us, likely both of us for most, and we'll be there to assist with things. And certainly the executive committee in the past has asked that the county manager and the chief financial officer, myself, also present to the executive committee in September a recommended balanced budget, taking into effect the prioritization that was approved by the county board, looking at the capital improvement plan, the 5-year plan, looking at the priorities that the county has talked about in the directional plan and other directions that are out there, as well as factoring in good business practice, as well as the levy limits. There are a lot of things to consider in pulling together a governmental budget, and that is part of the challenge. So that will be the next steps, the month of August and into September. And with that, I'll end my report.
Thank you. Any questions? Anybody?
Okay.
I don't see any. All right. Speak up if I'm missing you. I'm sorry. The screen's only so many faces on it. Moving on.
Okay.
And NDC bonds refinancing.
Yes, so in the May 2020 meeting of the Dunn County Board of Supervisors, they passed a resolution that authorized the county manager and CFO to work with our municipal advisor and the bond council on refinancing our 2012 debt issue for the neighbors of Dunn County. We had to put it on hold because of the market volatility, and the authorization was to allow staff to pull the trigger, as it were, on a refinancing, provided certain minimum criteria were met, including the amount of the principal not exceeding the 14.2 million, and that there is a net value savings over the remaining life of the bonds of at least 5% of the refunded debt service. And that, of course, we don't extend the period of time that the bonds, which would remain April 1st of 2032. What I wanted to report is that we did get a favorable offer on a direct sale with a cost value savings of 8.2% or $1.2 million savings on the bonds over the remaining life of the bonds. So we went ahead and accepted that direct sale. And we had agreed, of course, upon doing that, to report to the executive committee and to the county board on that step. I don't know if there's any questions on that.
Any questions? Tim, Supervisor,
Yeah.
you know?
As the refinancing occurs and money's inside the sinking fund, will that be reimbursed back to the county, or will that be applied to the existing debt prior to refinancing?
I'll defer that question to our CFO.
Thank you. The process in this is when the refinancing closes in August, the funds will be placed into an escrow account, and we'll be utilizing a fiscal agent to manage those funds. So what that means is the county has no access to those funds. We don't even control the payments, the insurance payments, or the actual payoff in 2023 of the refinanced bonds. All we do is continue to make our debt service payments between now and the actual changeover to the new bonds in 2023. That's when the county will start realizing the savings. But in the meantime, there's an intermediary. That's one of the protections that's put in place in an advanced refinancing, where the county doesn't hold the money and doesn't have access to that and potentially not utilize it the way it was intended to be. So all of those earnings stay in that account, any interest earnings. And at the end, once the transaction is completed in April of 2023, if there are any residual funds, those do come to the county, which would then go into the debt service fund and required to be used for debt service payments.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, seeing none, we'll move on. Purchase orders.
So in your packet, there is the usual list of purchase orders in excess of $40,000. I believe most of them are fairly self-explanatory. I'd be happy to field any questions that there may be.
Any questions? If not,
That concludes my report.
we will move on to 8, report of departments, and we will hear from our outside auditor. April is with us, I know. Oh, there she is.
Yeah.
All
Good
right,
evening.
go ahead, April.
Okay, sounds good. Well, in your packet, you should have received a draft copy of the executive audit summary, it's called. And so that is usually what we go over as far as your financial statements and audit report are probably over 100 pages long. So we pull out the highlights of that information and summarize it here to go over it with you. And so I will just start on what's numbered as page 1 in there, and it says audit findings and results on the top. And so we'll start with this, and then we'll get into some of the numbers. And as far as performing the audit and completing it, we are required to report certain things at the conclusion of it. And so the second paragraph there is the audit opinion. And we issued an unmodified opinion on your financial statements, which is considered a clean opinion or the highest opinion that you can receive. And so that's obviously what you're striving for, and that means your financial statements are in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles and governmental accounting standards. The very next paragraph there is a report on internal controls. And again, this is a required report that we are to communicate to you. And in this section, you'll see that we reported 2 material weaknesses and 1 significant deficiency. These are items that you've seen before in the past. They're all repeating, and there are no new ones. So they're very common with governmental entities as far as we report most of these common ones for most of the governments that we work with in Northwest Wisconsin. And so what they mean, the very first one there is the financial statement. And what that means is that governance and management are responsible for the financial statements. But as I said, it's over 100 pages long, and I'm sure Keith and his staff would say that they probably don't really have the time and availability to pull that all together. So you look to us to assist you with that process. And then the next one is material audit adjustments, which is somewhat similar to the first one in the fact that due to all the accounting standards you have to follow and report on, you look to us again for that specific expertise in knowing that and helping adjust some of the numbers to put them in the financial statement. Then under significant deficiencies, we have limited segregation of duties that we report. And so a significant deficiency is considered a little less severe than a material weakness. And there are instances within the county where there are good segregation of duties, but it's very hard to get a complete segregation of duties. And what that means is in the different transactional processes, disbursements, receipting, payroll, journal entries, one person shouldn't really have access to different parts of that process. They shouldn't be able to initiate the transaction, reconcile it, and report on it. And so obviously there are instances where you have good controls in place as far as reviews by other people, but it's not necessarily cost effective and time efficient for you to be able to really, as I said, limit the segregation of duties to the complete extent possible. It just wouldn't be cost effective and probably really attainable completely. But what you do need to be aware of here is that it's a continual process to keep evaluating your processes and your controls to see where you can, make little changes here and there to add somebody in the process, to have an additional review, to mitigate the risk of error or fraud occurring. Then the next paragraph there is compliance, and what this relates to is the federal and state grant funding that the county receives. You receive a significant amount of federal and state grant funds, and so we are required not only to do the financial audit, but what's considered a single audit as well, where we have to test certain requirements of that grant funding. And as of right now, that is still in process. That's not due until September 30th. But what we've done up to this point in time, we are not reporting any compliance findings there. Then the very last section on this page is just some other items that we've noted, and these have been reported for the last few years as far as just some maybe improvements that could be made. And I know they're known. It's just kind of the nature of the beast as far as some changes that have occurred over the last few years as far as new software system, some transitioning of your staff and that sort of thing, where as we get into the audit, some of the reconciliations for receivables and payables and accruals weren't necessarily completed and ready to go at that point in time. And so that is what we're reporting here, that generally that would be the goal, is to have all of that reconciled and ready to go when the audit occurs. And I do foresee that in the future being able to eliminate that additional comment there with those items. So that is, as I said, again, the audit findings and the high-level results. So we can move on to the next page and get into some of the numbers then. So for item number 1, we are looking at your general fund, so your main operating fund of the county. And here you'll see that we show a 4-year comparison, so you can see how things have changed over the last few years and some historical trends and stuff like that. I won't go over every line item on here, but just hit on some of the ones that may have changed significantly or that are kind of key benchmarks that we look at. And the final report is to be issued by the end of this week, and there was a slight change from this draft. And so you'll see the total assets there, and then the change in fund balance for the general fund. In the final report, it will actually be increased by about $36,000 for an additional item that was added at the end. So, but for this purpose, it won't be a significant change, but just a disclaimer in case you're comparing this to that final report. So the first part that we see here is the assets of the general fund. And the big one item that sticks out here is the second from the bottom that says due from other funds. And what this entails is amounts of cash basically that the general fund has somewhat loaned to other funds for cash flow purposes. So this relates to the neighbors, which has the interfunded loan of $8.3 million. Human Services at the end of the year had negative cash of $1.4 million, and then the Highway Fund had $2.1 million. So the neighbors obviously is something that has been carrying over and increasing over the years due to the cash flow issues there. And then the Human Services is a pretty common one, and that is mainly due to timing at year end of when the expenditures were incurred and paid versus when that grant funding comes in after year end. And so that will obviously reduce that interfund amount as grant funds are received in 2020. And then the highway, which we will get into a little bit later, more specifics on the highway fund. But that was a new one this year where there was negative cash at the end of the year. And again, what that means is that essentially to actually pay for the expenditures that were incurred in the highway fund for the year, instead of having to go out and borrow funding, the cash was just simply borrowed from the general fund. And then as we go further down, you have your liabilities, and then you get into the fund balance section. And so the fund balance is the net of your assets and liabilities. And so that is kind of your reserve or what's available. You will see here that fund balance actually increased by about $2.4 million. And that was a function of some increased sales tax, some increased shared revenue, and then just some expenditures, carryover appropriations and stuff, expenditures that weren't actually incurred during the year. And so that is a positive result for your general fund to have that increase in fund balance. And then if you go to that fund balance section, though, you'll see that there's actually 3 different categories of fund balance. So that top category of the $9.17 million is non-spendable. So even though it's available or it's part of that net of assets and liabilities, it's in a form that's not really available currently. So it relates to those delinquent taxes that you don't necessarily have access to at this point in time. And then it also relates to that long-term due from the neighbors. which that cash has somewhat been spent already. And until the neighbors can pay that back, it's not really available at this point in time. Then the next item is assignments, and you may have heard this in the past as designations or set-asides. So you have $835,000 at the end of 2019 identified for specific uses and sources, or uses. So those are your carryovers that have been identified. And so that category is a little bit flexible. But again, it's not really considered available since you somewhat identified the purpose already. And that includes, as I said, carryovers that have been approved. So then what that results in is that unassigned fund balance that you see of the 8.3 million. And you'll see that that's very comparable to what that specific fund balance portion was last year. And what we look at there as a benchmark is that unassigned fund balance compared to your annual expenditures. And you'll see that percentage highlighted somewhat at the bottom of item number 1. And at the end of 2019, it was about 38-39%. Again, similar to what you had last year. The recommendation that we have there is to have that level at about 25 to 33%. And I know some bond councils do look even for that to be between about 30 to 40%. So you're at a very good level there as far as what you have unassigned and available in fund balance compared to your expenditures that you see. So that is the kind of snapshot and high-level summary that we like to go over for the general fund. Again, positive results there this year compared to what you've seen in the last couple of years. And your fund balance is at a very good level. So then I will continue on to item number 2. And this is just the ending fund balance for some of your other special revenue funds that that you report. And you'll see here that most of the, I won't hit on every fund here, human services is at a zero balance always per county policy. So at the end of the year, if the human service fund saw expenditures exceed revenues, then a portion, the general fund would basically cover that deficit. In the current year, Human Services actually saw a $900,000 positive result. And so that $900,000 was transferred to the general fund to zero it out. So that's obviously played into the general fund increasing as well because of these positive results in the Human Service Fund. And in the other 3 years that you see there were negative results in Human Services. So there was actually a transfer from the general fund to Human Services. So obviously a positive result this year there with the revenues exceeding the expenditures for that. Otherwise, you will see that the solid waste fund has gone down over the last 4 years. In between 16 and 17, I believe the decrease was a lot of capital expenditure related items. And then just in the last couple of years, it's simply been due to operations expenditures exceeding the revenues coming in there. With that, we will continue on. And then item number 3 on the next page shows your debt service funds. And this is simply for that purpose of bringing in the resources, tax levy or transfers, to pay for your debt service principal and interest each year. And so usually this fund would have around a zero balance. Very common because you're only putting in there what you need. You'll see that you actually have a little bit of a balance, and this is a result of premiums on debt issued and that sort of thing. So you have a little bit available there that you could apply to future debt payments. In the current year, $2.6 million was paid out of this fund for principal, and about $1.1 million, a little under that, was paid on interest on your bonds and debt. So that is the debt service fund. The next item is your capital projects fund. And here you'll see that you have $262,000 balance at the end of 19. And so that actually includes the $8 million that was issued in debt for capital projects. And then most of that was spent during the year. So you see a little bit of that remaining to be spent down in 2020 on finalizing those projects that it was issued for. The next section that we go to is item number 5, and this is your enterprise funds, which the first one is your highway department. And so I mentioned a little bit of the results on this earlier, but what you'll see there on that very top line is that at the end of the year, there was actually no cash available within this fund, and there was that interfund loan with the general fund. You'll also see that over the last couple of years, or I guess the taxes receivable doesn't necessarily portray this, but over the last couple of years, there has been a decrease in that tax levy that has gone over to the highway department. So then when we get down to the liability section, you'll see that that current liability number increased in 2019, and that is an offset of that cash effect. So in that current liabilities number is the amount that highway owes the general fund at the end of the year. And again, a little bit of that is timing differences as far as payables and expenditures were paid in 2019, but some of that funding in reimbursement from the state and that sort of thing doesn't necessarily come in until 2020. So then what we get down to here towards the bottom of the page for the highway department is that change in net position. And so you'll see that for the kind of operations and the main change, it was a little over -3 million that expenditures exceeded revenues. And then you did have a transfer in though of $1 million of that debt issue that was applied to highway operations specifically. So there was a net of $3.3 million deficit or reduction in the net position for the fund. And that was, there was an expected decrease in this net position. There was a budget of about 1.5 million that you were planning to use of available fund or net position. And then some other factors that kind of resulted in this deficit and decrease is that there were higher costs for maintenance and overlays. And then winter maintenance was also higher than expected. And I'm sure you can probably all recall the winter that we had last year with many, many snow days in February and March. And so that increased those expenditures, and that those different factors played into the decrease that you see here. Something kind of similar to what we look at in the general fund as far as your unassigned fund balance. Here we look at the current ratio, it's called, and that is your current assets to your current liability. So what you have available in cash and current assets available to what you have to pay in the near future. And you'll see that generally you would like that to be at least a 1-to-1 ratio, and you have had that the last 3 years. But with that decrease in your funds, in your expenditures exceeding your revenues, and that decrease in your cash balance, that did fall under that 1-to-1 ratio that we're generally looking for. So I know that there has been lots of time put into really analyzing this internally to make sure that, and in the budget process that will come out as far as looking at 2021 and what may need to be done there to make sure that the results are a positive result going into the future here. So. Chairman Bartlett, do you want me to just continue or take questions? Or?
I think Supervisor Steen has a question. So go ahead, Supervisor Steen.
Yes, thank you, April. Going back up to the liabilities and looking at the pension liability of 740,000 versus 18, which was nothing, I guess. And then going back, I guess, how could you explain that?
And this is not to get too into the technical aspects of the accounting standards, but this relates to the county's participation in the Wisconsin retirement system. And it's in relation to a particular accounting standard that you have to follow. And so in 2018, the WRS is very well funded. And so they actually had an asset that year. And so that is why you don't see anything on that line in 2018. And then in 2019, it wasn't 100% funded. And what this liability and this standard makes you do is it makes you take your percentage of that fund, so all of WRS, your percentage of that proportionate share of the activities somewhat in that funding in WRS and putting it on your books. And so I think it's more viable and useful for different states where there is a negative major, it's not well funded. And so what they're saying is, so if this, retirement system went defunct, what have you put into it that your employees won't get back out of it? And so again, WRS is well funded that it teeters between a liability and an asset. So sorry if I got a little too technical, but hopefully that makes sense.
One other question I have there, April, is that the pension fund is usually figured on a 5-year rolling average. And would this liability be handled the same way?
So this information comes from the state and it's actually a year behind. So the actuaries make the calculation as far as the not only current status of the funds, but also, yes, looking at some of the future expectations and results of the funds. And so your proportionate share is based on a 3-year average of activity.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Supervisor Bjork.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. And going back to the item number 1 under the general fund, I was just wondering on the fund balances with comparing from 16 to 19, the non-spendables, changed about 8 million. And then the unassigned also had a big change. Is there a relationship there where one balances out the other, or why would there be such a big changes in both those areas, non-spendable and unassigned from 16?
Thank you for pointing that out. That was a change as far as how the amount due from the neighbors. So that deficit cash that the neighbors has that is loaned from the general fund. And so it was initially reported as unassigned, but due to the fact that it wasn't really considered available, it continues to grow and you weren't really expecting to get that paid back in the near future. So reporting of that was changed. And so it was really taking that out of that unassigned and bringing it up to non-spendable because it's not considered available really.
Any other? Oh, go ahead, Supervisor Bjork.
Then on the balance sheet summary, where the capital assets, I guess I've always wondered and just trying to understand the county's value. When we changed from the former area Wilson out to the community center now, are we stronger or not as strong as far as capital assets? Are our assets stronger not having the Wilson? I mean, I'd like to know.
And so you're looking at the capital assets because I think the only place it's been reported so far is in the highway department. And so these particular capital assets only relate, that value only relates to the highway building, machinery, and equipment. In this summary, we don't actually show in the financial statements the overall amount of capital assets for the county is reported, but not necessarily in this particular summary. And that, I believe the Wilson sale didn't actually completely go through until 2020. And so it won't be reflected in, well, the Wilson building will still be on the capital asset listing and in that total during 2019 or at the end of 2019. And so, I mean, your capital assets have generally gone up in the last few years simply due to the fact of your capital improvements have exceeded the amount of depreciation on those assets. But yes, this is purely just the highway equipment.
Thank you. I see that now, that the F on draft is right over the top of highway. So thank you very much.
Any other questions at this time, or can we have April move on? I don't see any other questions, April, so go ahead.
Okay, so we'll move on to the next page where we continue with the neighbors. And as I said here, when you're looking at the balance sheet, we have the detailed balance sheet here. The big number that sticks out is that advance from other funds. So here you'll see there has been no cash available. Well, last year there was actually for the sale of some of that land right in front of the building, and that cash was used though for, it was to be applied in 2019. So that's why you saw $100,000 of cash last year. But otherwise you generally haven't had operating cash available there. And so you'll see where that 8.3 million advance from the other funds is the amount that's due to the general fund. And then the very last line in this section is that change in net position. And you'll see that there that your expenditures here exceeded revenues by the 1.4 million. When I did give this presentation to the committee for the neighbors, we did have a little bit more detail breaking that out, in which operations showed an actual positive result of about $200,000. But what you also have hitting this and making it a negative result is the interest that you're paying on the debt over there, along with depreciation expense. So those are obviously expenditures that relate to the activities over there, and that you'll be seeing for due to the investment that you put into that building. You have those additional expenditures that has been resulting in negative change in that position. The very last enterprise fund that you report on is that transit commission. And here we'll just kind of go down to the very bottom section there. As far as the change in that position there was $45,000 positive. So that means the revenues exceeded the expenditures by that. And you'll see the current ratio is at that 3.63, which again is above the 1-to-1 ratio that we're looking for. So positive results from that. Okay, so then the next one to look at is the internal service funds. And so these are your workers' comp insurance and health insurance funds. And you'll see that change in that position for the workers' comp was a positive $143,000. However, on the health insurance side, you'll see that you had some pretty high claims this year, and that those exceeded the revenues going into that fund by the 1.3 million. And so you've seen negative results in that fund for the last 3 years. And I know during the committee meetings last week, Mr. Miller did point out that that has been assessed and has been addressed as far as changing your rates there so that the revenues coming in will offset those claims and expenditures that you're seeing. So we are in the home stretch of the information that we usually present, and that we end here with the long-term obligations. So I had mentioned the debt service fund and how much you had paid. And here we just show what the total balance is outstanding. Your general obligations is at that 38 million. And that's obviously due to the payments that you made, but you also issued the $8 million in 2019. And we take a peek at what that compares to is every county, municipality in the state has a debt limit. And the bottom lines there, you'll see that that 38 million is 23% of what your debt limit is for the county. And that debt limit is based on 5% of the equalized value within the county. So the counties that we work with in Northwest Wisconsin, they generally utilize about 0 to 20% of their debt limit. So you're right around the top end of that at the 20%. And you can see that you were higher than that in 16. And so you kind of kept around that percentage. So at a good level of utilizing the debt capacity available to you. And then the other two items that we show here is that vested compensated absences and OPEB liability, and that relates to what your employees have earned at this point in time for vacation, sick, comp time to be paid out into the future. And so that's an estimation of what that value is. So again, those are the highlights that we generally go over that pull out the key pieces of financial information that we feel are necessary for you to know as the governing board of the county.
Are there any questions? After looking at this and thinking about it, if you come up with some questions, don't be afraid to reach out to our CFO for the answers. I do not.
One question,
Oh,
Mr. Chair.
yes, Supervisor Bjork.
Why wasn't the Dunn County Solid Waste have an overview in the enterprise fund on this report? Why were they skipped?
Solid waste was up in section number 2, actually. So it's reported as a special revenue fund. And I had mentioned how that fund balance has decreased over the last 4 years, which some of that decrease was the result of capital purchases, but in the last couple of years, it was really a result of just operational expenditures exceeding the operational revenues for that service.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions? Oh, Supervisor Headland.
Yes, Chair, just one, if I don't know if April can answer this for us, but looking back at the neighbors' accounts receivable, I see have basically doubled over the last 2 years. Is that just operational accounts receivable, or is there anything left in terms of the sale of that land out in front of the building that's still pending, or is this just from operation?
It's just operations receivable, and the increase is somewhat, especially in 2019, somewhat due to staff transitions and just the timing of billing towards the end of the year, and then when those funds were received after year end.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I could add to that, please, just very quickly.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Headland, Supervisor Headland, April was right that, yeah, we were down 2 positions in the billing area the last quarter of the year and for the first quarter of this year. So receivables did slip. As well as the fact that volume was up. Our census, the low point was in 2018. I believe it was early to mid-year 2018. And as that grows and you have more activity, your receivables will grow. So it's a combination of those two. But I think the most notable was the staff shortage. That is on the correct trend where it's on a downward trajectory now.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right. I don't see any others. Moving on. 8B, we have printed reports from Health and Human Services and Environmental Services in your packet. I don't think anybody is at the meeting tonight to speak to those. If you have questions, please reach out to those departments and ask them. So moving on to 9, consideration of reports, resolutions, ordinances from the standing committees. From the executive committee, a resolution authorizing a countywide referendum on whether the county of Dunn should exceed the levy limit specified under section 66.0602 Wisconsin statutes for the next 5 years for the solid waste and recycling program. I need a motion for this to get started.
I'll make that motion.
Supervisor Bjork moves.
Second it, Mr. Chair.
Supervisor Maves seconds.
Mr. Chairman, I can volunteer information.
And Mr. Miller will speak to that.
Sure. We had a draft of this resolution in front of the county. What? Am I muted? Is anybody hearing me?
I'm hearing you.
Thank you.
Yep.
I can hear you.
I think that's your computer. We had a draft of this resolution in front of the county board last month. We forwarded it to this month to fill in the financial data, the best available financial data in terms of the estimated levy and the percentage that this proposed referendum would add. If it passes, the proposal is for $1 million in additional levy to be applied to the solid waste and recycling program each year for 5 years. And we also had a refinement of the language of the referendum question, which makes it clear that the purpose of this $1 million per year for 5 years would be for costs associated with a household hazardous waste collection or clean sweep program and capital expenditures associated with the program. So that refined language is in this version. And the question before the county board is whether or not it shall be included on the ballot in November.
Discussion. Supervisor Bjork.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, what was the dollar amount last month when we talked about it for putting this on the ballot?
The only dollar amount we had was the amount of the request, which was $1 million per year for 5 years. What we did not have filled in, because we did not have the financial information, was the estimated amount of the levy and the percentage, if this is passed, the percentage that it would represent. So those numbers had to be generated.
Supervisor Bjork, did you want to know the expense of what it would cost to put it on the ballot?
Yes, that's
Okay.
exactly what I want.
And I think that's about 8,300, isn't it, Julie?
Yeah.
It's about $8,300. And that's assuming that we would get charged all of the charges for the setup, because we have one referendum coming already. So it may be less, but we don't know that. So we have to assume that we would get charged all the setup charges. Any other questions? Discussion? Supervisor Prochnow.
What's this going to cost per 100,000 of equalized value?
That is not a number that we have worked out. We will get that number for you, Supervisor Prochnow.
What other capital improvements are they looking at doing?
Some of the anticipated is continued maintenance of a facility that is past its useful life, the 30-year facility that we have, equipment that also needs to be replaced as the program goes forward, and anticipation of the future purposes and needs for the solid waste and recycling program, which may include a new transfer station itself to replace the existing facility, which would be built on property that was acquired by the county for that purpose in 2016, 2017.
With several townships getting out of the program, is this the right time to be doing that?
That's one of the germane questions. There are several townships that are certainly exploring the possibility of becoming their own RU. We've only received notification from one that they intend to do so. There's ongoing discussions on others, including the costs to those townships themselves. And that has, in terms of the costs though, and the consequences of those, it simply means that the participating towns bear more of the burdens of operations. So those are operational considerations, which comes into play whether or not we change or scale back or alter our operational plans or the number of remote sites that we operate. What this is intended for is for capital expenditures. Again, if we have a failure, as we have on the floor of the transfer station, have to replace it, an overhead door, equipment, itself, it has to replace the baler or the loader, et cetera. So irrespective of the consequences to the operational costs with the departure potentially of one or more townships, we still have these capital considerations, which is what this referendum is about.
What's their general budget a year?
I believe we have Morgan Girk on the meeting right now. Morgan, can you address that? Is Morgan Girk no longer with us? He was on the call.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, can you repeat the question, please?
What is the general fund, what is the budget of the solid waste a year?
It's about 2.9 million, the total budget.
So we want a referendum, a third of their budget for capital improvements. Okay.
And
that's it.
Again, Supervisor Prochnow, I appreciate the question. It actually has been the topic of conversation at Solid Waste and Recycling Board, and then the Planning and Regulations, Plan Development and Regulations Committee for over a year now. The costs and consequences related to the operations are tied to bringing our operations up to standards in terms of staffing and procedures, and B, the severe drop in revenues as a consequence of China's action in 2017 to stop accepting American recycled goods, which had an effect all throughout the country. So we are no different than anybody else in terms of those costs. The costs of maintaining our program, which has been categorized by experts in the field as a Cadillac program, providing considerable value for what we've been charging. Those costs have continued to go up. The revenues have continued to slip. In the meantime, on top of those considerations, as I say, we've got a transfer station that's over 30 years old and is past its useful life. We've got a transfer station that's built for a model of recycling and waste management that's no longer sustainable. So the need for the capital investments, if we're going to stay in the business at all of operating a solid waste and recycling program, we have to address these capital expenditures. This year, for instance, because of the drop in revenues, we had to make an adjustment to the tune of $330,000 to help support that program. That's without regard to the capital expenditures that we are encountering every year and trying to maintain a facility that frankly needs to be replaced. So either we make these kinds of, set ourselves up to make these kinds of capital investments so that we can sustain a new program going forward, which means a new facility and new equipment, or we get out of the business.
Yeah, I understand that. Just so you know, I did some quick numbers. It looks like about $30 per $100,000 of equalized value that's going to cost everybody. That's it. Thanks.
I think Supervisor Prochnow, one thing that I've thought about a lot about this is it's a big decision, and the county board could make the decision to borrow money and build a new transfer station. We could make the decision to get out of the business, but having the referendum puts the question to our residents of Dunn County, and to find out how important this solid waste and recycling program is to them. And if they would like us to keep it going, this seems like a practical way of doing it, because if we were to keep it going, we know we're going to have to build a new facility within the next few years, and putting money away for it would help that we wouldn't have to loan to go out and borrow so much to build it. Now, if the residents of Dunn County vote against the referendum, then we know that it's probably time for Dunn County to get out of the business or look at one of the many options that we could do. But we would not continue business the way it is right now. Are there any other questions? Supervisor Rogers.
So after 5 years, are we still going to be at $1 million a year deficit moving forward? If we need $1 million more every year for the next 5 years, what's going to happen in 5 years?
We're not saying that it's $1 million deficit. The money that would be put away, I believe in your draft budget that you received today, the capital improvements were with 3 machines, I believe, only. So there wouldn't be a lot of that $1 million being spent. The majority of that $1 million would be being put away for a new facility in the future. And that would only happen if the referendum passed and we wanted to stay in the business.
Can we be sustainable if we build a new facility? And can we require the townships to be part of this, or do we run the risk of doing it alone?
No, we can be sustainable. Like other counties that have invested a great deal into some type of a facility, they pass a flow ordinance, so everything in their county would go through their facility, and that would make it sustainable. We would just have to make sure that our fees would be such that it would be sustainable.
Are we then competing with the private sector in waste management?
That is a possibility. If you're talking about the waste portion. The recycling portion, of course, is mandated by the state that governments do. What we operate under right now is a group of agreements with the participating townships where the county is the responsible unit as mandated by state statute. That will continue to be a case. So that is not a case of competing with private industry. The waste management portion of it, yes. I mean, there are alternatives. What these things boil down to ultimately is consideration of the cost to the residents of Dunn County. There are economies of scale that can be realized when a group of us, townships and the county, work together, that can be potentially lower costs to our residents in terms of waste management than if each township or each property owner has to contract separately for that same service. But, you know, so could you argue that it's a competition? Yes, but the justification for it is an attempt to hold the costs down.
Thank
Dunn
you.
County has a little bit quite a bit of expanded facility for recycling, where I believe there's about 2 pages of things that we recycle, where the majority of the private contractors are recycling the 5 or 7 mandated things to recycle. So there is, I totally agree with Mr. Miller that there would be competition with the solid waste portion and the mandated portion of the recycling, but not the others, because nobody else is doing it. And that's one thing that Dunn County, our facility, has that helps our county greatly. Any other discussion?
Supervisor Bauer here.
Yes.
May I address the chair?
Yes.
Do you, whether this passes or not, do you see the increase in the fees next year, and what percentage might that be?
I would guess the fees are definitely going to go up. It's definitely probably going to hinge on how many municipalities stay in. I know that Mr. Girk has a few scenarios run, because there's at least one township and possibly the city that is talking about getting out. Definitely, if the referendum passes, we're going to have to figure out what we're going to do with the program for the next couple of years, because this money doesn't finance the program for the next couple of years until a new facility is built. So we will have to either raise fees or contract out, go with private haulers. There's many different scenarios that we could go with if it passes. If it doesn't, there's also many other scenarios we can go with. Maybe Morgan has more to add to that.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
So to put it in perspective, the increase in costs that we're looking at for next year, we have forecasted that. We've supplied all of our municipalities with a spreadsheet that allows them to calculate per capita. It's a live spreadsheet where they can pull out municipalities and then see their per capita be recalculated in real time. It's a tool to use. So as the chair said, we have gotten acknowledgement from one municipality, that was Town of Red Cedar. They do intend to pull out and apply to the DNR to become their own RU. To put this in perspective, the current per capita per person in Dunn County for solid waste and recycling combined is $23 per person. And that's, I don't have to tell you that that's just a hell of a value, and it's really an unrealistic number, you know, in comparison to the costs that it costs us to execute these programs and services. it would be going, our forecasted amount of per capita per person per year for 2021. If everybody stays in the program, we have 26 member municipalities now, either in solid waste and recycling or just recycling. It would go from $23 to $57 per person per year. If the city of Menominee would pull out, for instance, and we lose that population, it would go from $57 to $72. And, you can take it from there. So the cost is definitely going up significantly. The reasons for that are many. Mr. Miller touched on some of them. The other main reason is that the per capita in this program has always been heavily subsidized through tipping fees at the transfer station, sales of recyclables, and a much larger recycling grant that we no longer get as much money through the recycling grant. All of the collection sites lose money every year, and those subsidies were used to keep those per capita numbers unrealistically low for decades. The per capita assigned to every person in Dunn County hasn't wiggled more than, I think, probably 75 cents, 80 cents over the past 20 years. And that's unrealistic. It should have been a steady curve upwards to this $57 starting this year to actually account for the costs of our operations. So while this change is fairly blunt, it took me some time, and I'll take responsibility for it. It took me quite a while to figure out how the per capita works, only because when I got here, there was no director here. I didn't have any time with the previous administration to understand that. And what I found was there was a whole lot of undocumented verbal agreements and formulas worked into the budget that weren't on paper. And that's because, like I said, there was all kinds of unique and creative subsidization being implemented to keep that per capita artificially low. What happened in the background as that was going on is the transfer station continued to age, the sites continued to age, all of our hydraulic compactors were end of life. We had to replace that equipment. So to answer your question, the forecasted increase right now, if all 26 municipalities stay in, we're looking at a jump from $23 per person to $57 per person for 2021. And another way to put that in perspective, I live in Eau Claire. I have privatized services at my curb for solid waste and recycling. I pay $64 a quarter. And I think Mr. Miller lives in the city. He pays near that amount as well for curbside services, with no opportunity for non-landfill items like tires, bulbs, lamps, batteries, scrap metal, any of that sort of thing. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, we will, are you ready to call the roll for vote? Pardon?
This is just a voice vote.
Just a voice vote? Okay. I think we should. I think so.
Mr. Chair,
I think we should have a roll call vote. Supervisor
I
Bjork.
agree with you. Thank you, sir.
Okay. We'll have the clerk call the roll for the vote. Yeah, and be ready to unmute for when your name comes up, and mute again afterwards, please.
Supervisor Keeter?
Yes.
Supervisor Keeter recorded as yes. Supervisor Leno?
Yes.
Supervisor Leno recorded as yes. Supervisor Maves?
Yes.
Supervisor Maves recorded as yes. Supervisor McCullough?
Yes.
Supervisor McCullough recorded as yes. Supervisor Morehouse?
Yes.
Supervisor Morehouse recorded as yes. Supervisor Niehoff?
Yes.
Supervisor Niehoff recorded as yes. Supervisor Prochnow?
No.
Supervisor Prochnow recorded as no. Supervisor Quinn?
Yes.
Supervisor Quinn recorded as yes. Supervisor Rogers?
Yes.
Supervisor Rogers recorded as yes. Supervisor Score?
Yes.
Supervisor Score recorded as yes. Supervisor Steen?
Yes.
Supervisor Steen recorded as yes. Supervisor Story?
Yes.
Supervisor Story recorded as yes. Supervisor Tripp?
Yes.
Supervisor Tripp recorded as yes. Supervisor Vandermeulen?
Yes.
Supervisor Vandermeulen recorded as yes. Supervisor Vogel?
Yes.
Supervisor Vogel recorded as yes. Supervisor Zons?
Yes.
Supervisor Zons recorded as yes. Supervisor Anderson?
Yes.
Supervisor Anderson recorded as yes. Supervisor Bauer?
Yes.
Supervisor Bauer recorded as yes. Supervisor Gary Bjork?
Yes.
Supervisor Gary Bjork recorded as yes. Supervisor Larry Bjork?
Yes.
Supervisor Larry Bjork recorded as yes. Supervisor Calabrese?
Yes.
Supervisor Calabrese recorded as yes. Supervisor Hartung? Supervisor Hartung? Supervisor Hartung? I'll come back. Supervisor Headland?
Yes.
Supervisor Headland recorded as yes. Supervisor Jensen?
No.
Supervisor Jensen recorded as no. Supervisor Johnson?
Yes.
Supervisor Johnson recorded as yes. Supervisor Kennedy? Supervisor Kennedy?
Yes.
Supervisor Kennedy recorded as yes. Supervisor Kinnear?
Yes.
Supervisor Kinnear recorded as yes. Supervisor Crumry?
Yes.
Supervisor Crumry recorded as yes. Supervisor Hartung? Supervisor Hartung? Chairman
Yes.
Bartlett? Oh,
Yes,
okay. Supervisor Hartung recorded as yes. Chairman Bartlett?
yes.
Chairman Bartlett recorded as yes.
Resolution passes. Moving on. 9.2. Resolution ending the state of emergency declaration established by the Dunn County Resolution number 2020-18. Motion for the resolution, Supervisor Steen. And a second,
I second.
Supervisor Jensen seconds. Supervisor Steen, speaking to the resolution.
Yes, the executive board had quite a thorough discussion of the situation, with the end result being to bring it to the full board with the executive board's unanimous recommendation that we do not approve this, the change. For myself, I changed my mind after seeing what is happening in Wisconsin and in Dunn County and in other states. I still don't like it, but I feel it is in the best interest of the county to leave as is for now. It serves the county's best interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Steen. Any other discussion or speaking to or against?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Supervisor Leno.
Yeah, I'd like to encourage people to vote no for this resolution. I think we're premature on this consideration due to the fact that we have yet to have the university students come into our area at this particular time and schools to reopen. I think we need to see what happens at that particular time before we give this any serious consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speaking to the resolution?
Mr. Chair,
Supervisor Tripp.
thank you. One of the objections to the emergency declaration that I've heard expressed is that the county board is abrogating our responsibility and instead giving that up to the
unelected management. I really disagree with that basic sentiment, because what we're doing in this case is taking an active step to enable our county government to respond quickly to an ever-changing situation. If you look very carefully at the decisions that have been made during this pandemic, one of the things I think you will notice is that they're virtually all either in the arena of public health, or they are decisions about how county government will actually operate. Very little of what has been decided outside the county board would find its way to any committee other than administration. And I think it's significant that we continue with the state of emergency. We continue to maintain the flexibility that that provides us. And so I urge you to vote no on this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speaking?
Supervisor Rogers.
Supervisor Larry Bjork.
Well, my 2 cents worth is that we should end the declaration of the state of emergency. I think it's time to move forward. This is not an epidemic where fatality rate is so great that we can't have bed space in hospitals for sick people. There are always going to be sick people, and there's always going to be the spread of something. But you know, how long can you hide from something you can't see? I mean, I see no end to this. I guess if I was on a wagon train going west to California in the 1800s, I wouldn't stop off at Missouri because I was afraid what might be out in the Dakotas. Sometimes you have to just step forward, take care of yourself, take care of your family, and you know, there's more to life than hiding from a pandemic that rightfully is serious, but I don't believe it's fatal. Thank you.
Supervisor Rogers, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I did.
Go ahead.
So I do believe that the decisions that have been made outside of the county board have been quite minimal. So I don't see the reason why it has to continue with the state of emergency. We as a board can continue to handle the things that need to be taken care of. And I do believe we were elected to make them decisions. So I feel it's our responsibility to do it. And I don't see the need to continue the state of emergency.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else speaking? Any other speaking? Supervisor McCullough.
I just wanted to note that given that our numbers have more than tripled since our last meeting, that we have no meeting under normal operations in August. So it would be September before we meet again. And that school is going to be coming in and the students will be coming in that window. Now is a terrible time to end the declaration of emergency.
Thank you. Supervisor Calabrese.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I wonder if it would be beneficial for those of us who weren't here in March, maybe for people watching on YouTube, if the county manager might be able to detail briefly just a couple of the strategically implemented policies that you've done, and that would be helpful if we do continue this.
Mr. Miller, would you like
Sure.
to?
Under the emergency declarations, as have been characterized, there's nothing earth-shattering that's happened, but there have been some things that have happened that normally would have required at least committee oversight, if not county board activity. These include implementation of the CARES Act provisions that relate to people who needed to stay home because they were notified they have COVID or exposure to COVID, or they need to stay home to provide childcare. We were able to implement those policies right away rather than having first to go to the Committee on Administration and then subsequently to the county board with changes to the employee handbook, a process that would have taken 2 months we were able to move adroitly and handle that quickly and get them in place, and then subsequently follow up by taking it through the normal process. We were able to implement right away the changes to public access to county buildings and facilities to try to slow the spread by restricting access to appointments only, so that we had an opportunity to ask health screening questions of persons who needed to visit county buildings and facilities, and provide masks to try to control that spread. That was another change. We were able to make changes to the procedures within the county itself in terms of county employees, the substantial increase in the number of employees who are working remotely, the authorization to acquire the necessary equipment to effect the remote work being done by those individuals, the use of masks when people are away from their workstations for those who do work in place. So it's been a number of those operational kinds of things that, in the absence of the emergency declaration, at least would have raised the question whether or not it required the oversight and the okay of the committee, if not the full county board. I anticipate going forward that much the same could be the case, but we could also face situations that are unforeseen, such as Barron County apparently faced just recently with a jump of some 70 plus positive cases in a single day. The ability to move adroitly in response to a changing landscape is what this allows us to do and has allowed us to do.
Thank you.
Any other questions or discussion?
Supervisor Bauer has his hand up.
Who?
Bauer.
Oh, Supervisor Bauer.
Thank you. I just, if we doesn't pass today, will it be on the agenda again, and how soon?
I would say if it doesn't pass today, it may not come back to the county board. I don't know.
As it exists right now, the emergency order expires at the end of December. I think it's December 31st. Maybe not. Maybe it's September. I'm sorry. September. So it's already set to expire in September.
Okay, I was curious if it was a permanent thing, or you just come back every month and try to do it. So September would be the end. Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Supervisor Headland, you had your hand up also?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. In light of the fact that we received a very strong and informative communication from our county health department asking us to consider at least promoting the use of masks. And I don't like wearing a mask. I don't know if any of you do. I don't, but I do, because it's not my mask for me. It's my mask for everybody that's around me, my family, my friends, my coworkers, the people I might meet in the street, the people I might say hello to at the grocery store. That's why you wear a mask. That's why you need to be careful. That's why we need to take care of this thing now before we don't have to take a chance to take care of it later. We've been asked by serious medical professionals, people, some of the best in the world, reside in this area. Some of the best hospitals and best clinics are here in Wisconsin and Minnesota. If we can't listen to them, let's hang in there. Let's put up with it for a little longer. Let's keep this thing going so we can be flexible, and let's keep ourselves healthy and safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speaking? I didn't see any other hands up.
Mr. Steen has his hand up.
Mr. Steen. Supervisor Steen.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Before we vote, just make sure what the no means and what the yes means.
All right.
I have a question.
Supervisor Jensen.
Yeah, at the end of September, if we kept it, would this be voted on again at the end of September, or would it be done?
Only it would only get revoted on if a committee brought it back to extend it for one reason or another.
Thank you.
I see no other hands, so we will,
Supervisor Rogers had his hand
Oh,
up.
Supervisor Rogers, sorry. Go ahead, Supervisor
We are
Rogers.
We're voting on the emergency declaration, not face masks, right?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I see no other hands. So a yes vote means stopping it, and a no vote means allowing it to continue. Any questions on that? If not, we will have the clerk we'll do a roll call vote and have the clerk call the roll like we did in the last vote. So please be ready when it's your turn to vote.
Supervisor Leno,
No.
Supervisor Leno recorded as no. Supervisor Maves,
No.
Supervisor Maves recorded as no. Supervisor McCullough,
No.
Supervisor McCullough recorded as no. Supervisor Morehouse,
No.
Supervisor Morehouse recorded as no. Supervisor Niehoff,
No.
Supervisor Niehoff recorded as no. Supervisor Prochnow,
No.
Supervisor Prochnow recorded as no. Supervisor Quinn,
No.
Supervisor Quinn recorded as no. Supervisor Rogers,
Yes, yes,
Supervisor Rogers recorded as yes. Supervisor Score,
No.
Supervisor Score recorded as no. Supervisor Steen,
No.
Supervisor Steen recorded as no. Supervisor Story,
Absolutely no.
Supervisor Story recorded as no. Supervisor Tripp,
No.
Supervisor Tripp recorded as no. Supervisor Vandermeulen,
No.
Supervisor Vandermeulen recorded as no. Supervisor Vogel,
No.
Supervisor Vogel recorded as no. Supervisor Zons,
No.
Supervisor Zons recorded as no. Supervisor Anderson, Supervisor Anderson,
No.
Supervisor Anderson recorded as no. Supervisor Bauer,
No.
Supervisor Bauer recorded as no. Supervisor Gary Bjork,
No.
Supervisor Gary Bjork recorded as no. Supervisor Larry Bjork,
Yes.
Supervisor Larry Bjork recorded as yes. Supervisor Calabrese,
No.
Supervisor Calabrese recorded as no. Supervisor Hartung, Supervisor Hartung,
No.
Supervisor Hartung recorded as no. Supervisor Headland,
No.
Supervisor Headland recorded as no. Supervisor Jensen,
Yes.
Supervisor Jensen recorded as yes. Supervisor Johnson,
No.
Supervisor Johnson recorded as no. Supervisor Kennedy,
No.
Supervisor Kennedy recorded as no. Supervisor Kinnear,
No.
Supervisor Kinnear recorded as no. Supervisor Crumry,
No.
Supervisor Crumry recorded as no. Supervisor Keeter,
No.
Supervisor Keeter recorded as no. Chairman Bartlett,
No,
Chairman Bartlett recorded as no.
resolution is defeated. Moving on to 9.3, resolution.
One question, please.
Yes, Supervisor Bjork.
So how long will this go on then? Is there any like ending date on it, or is it just until we end it?
It was 6 months for the date it was adopted, so it'll end the end of September, I believe. Correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
So then October 1st, the state of emergency has ended then?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So why did we have the vote if it was already approved till September 1st and then September 31st and October 1st it's rescinded?
The vote was to rescind it, to end the declaration now,
Oh, okay.
not in September.
Okay, thank you.
And just for clarification, the resolution was for 6 months from the date of adoption, and I believe that was the 18th of March. And so it won't run until the very end of September. It'll be and it'll be right around the time the county board is meeting in September 18th.
All right, moving on. 9.3, resolution approving FY 2020 budget adjustment for Health and Human Services Department. Motion for the
Mr.
resolution.
Chairman, Supervisor
Yes,
Morehouse moves approval of the budget adjustment for Health and Human Services.
thank you. Is there a second?
Supervisor Steen.
Supervisor Steen moves seconds. Speaking to the resolution, it's pretty much there that you've read it. Are there any questions for the budget adjustment? Let's go that way. Any questions? I don't see any. All right, we will have the clerk again call the roll vote.
Supervisor Maves,
Yes.
Supervisor Maves recorded as yes. Supervisor McCullough,
Yes.
Supervisor McCullough recorded as yes. Supervisor Morehouse,
Yes.
Supervisor Morehouse recorded as yes. Supervisor Niehoff,
Yes.
Supervisor Niehoff recorded as yes. Supervisor Prochnow,
Yes.
Supervisor Prochnow recorded as yes. Supervisor Quinn,
Yes.
Supervisor Quinn recorded as yes. Supervisor Rogers,
Yes.
Supervisor Rogers recorded as yes. Supervisor Score,
Yes.
Supervisor Score recorded as yes. Supervisor Steen, Supervisor Steen, Supervisor Steen. I'll come back to Supervisor Steen. Supervisor Story,
Yes.
Supervisor Story recorded as yes. Supervisor Tripp,
Yes.
Supervisor Tripp recorded as yes. Supervisor Vandermeulen,
Yes.
Supervisor Vandermeulen recorded as yes. Supervisor Vogel,
Yes.
Supervisor Vogel recorded as yes. Supervisor Zons,
Yes.
Supervisor Zons recorded as yes. Supervisor Anderson, Supervisor Anderson,
I'm sorry, yes.
Supervisor Anderson recorded as yes. Supervisor Bauer,
Yes.
Supervisor Bauer recorded as yes. Supervisor Gary Bjork,
Yes.
Supervisor Gary Bjork recorded as yes. Supervisor Larry Bjork,
Yes.
Supervisor Larry Bjork recorded as yes. Supervisor Calabrese,
Yes.
Supervisor Calabrese recorded as yes. Supervisor Hartung,
Yes.
Supervisor Hartung recorded as yes. Supervisor Headland,
Yes.
Supervisor Headland recorded as yes. Supervisor Jensen,
Yes.
Supervisor Jensen recorded as yes. Supervisor Johnson,
Yes.
Supervisor Johnson recorded as yes. Supervisor Kennedy,
Yes.
Supervisor Kennedy recorded as yes. Supervisor Kinnear,
Yes.
Supervisor Kinnear recorded as yes. Supervisor Crumry,
Yes.
Supervisor Crumry recorded as yes. Supervisor Keeter,
Yes.
Supervisor Keeter recorded as yes. Supervisor Leno,
Yes.
Supervisor Leno recorded as yes. Back to Supervisor Steen,
Yes.
Supervisor Steen recorded as yes. Chairman Bartlett.
Yes. Budget adjustment passes. Moving down to 9.4, resolution approving a FY 2020 budget adjustment for the environmental services. Motion, Supervisor Quinn moves, Supervisor McCullough seconds. Speaking, or is there any questions on the budget adjustment? We'll go that way. Supervisor Quinn? You're muted, Supervisor Quinn.
I'm sorry, I have my hand raised by mistake. I think that
Oh,
note's explanatory, as you said. I apologize.
All right. Any other questions? Seeing none, we will have the clerk call the roll again.
Supervisor McCullough.
Yes.
Supervisor McCullough recorded as yes. Supervisor Morehouse.
Yes.
Supervisor Morehouse recorded as yes. Supervisor Niehoff.
Yes.
Supervisor Niehoff recorded as yes. Supervisor Prochnow.
Yes.
Supervisor Prochnow recorded as yes. Supervisor Quinn. Supervisor Quinn.
Yes.
Supervisor Quinn recorded as yes. Supervisor Rogers.
Yes.
Supervisor Rogers recorded as yes. Supervisor Score.
Yes.
Supervisor Score recorded as yes. Supervisor Steen.
Yes.
Supervisor Steen recorded as yes. Supervisor Story.
Yes.
Supervisor Story recorded as yes. Supervisor Tripp.
Yes.
Supervisor Tripp recorded as yes. Supervisor Vandermeulen.
Yes.
Supervisor Vandermeulen recorded as yes. Supervisor Vogel.
Yes.
Supervisor Vogel recorded as yes. Supervisor Zons.
Yes.
Supervisor Zons recorded as yes. Supervisor Anderson.
Yes.
Supervisor Anderson recorded as yes. Supervisor Bauer.
Yes.
Supervisor Bauer recorded as yes. Supervisor Gary Bjork, excuse me.
Yes.
Supervisor Gary Bjork recorded as yes. Supervisor Larry Bjork.
Yes.
Supervisor Larry Bjork recorded as yes. Supervisor Calabrese.
Yes.
Supervisor Calabrese recorded as yes. Supervisor Hartung.
Yes.
Supervisor Hartung recorded as yes. Supervisor Headland.
Yes.
Supervisor Headland recorded as yes. Supervisor Jensen.
Yes.
Supervisor Jensen recorded as yes. Supervisor Johnson.
Yes.
Supervisor Johnson recorded as yes. Supervisor Kennedy.
Yes.
Supervisor Kennedy recorded as yes. Supervisor Kinnear.
Yes.
Supervisor Kinnear recorded as yes. Supervisor Crumry.
Yes.
Supervisor Crumry recorded as yes. Supervisor Keeter.
Yes.
Supervisor Keeter recorded as yes. Supervisor Lenow.
Yes.
Supervisor Lenow recorded as yes. Supervisor Maves.
Yes.
Supervisor Maves recorded as yes. Chairman Bartlett.
Yes.
Chairman Bartlett recorded as yes.
Resolution passes. Moving on to 9B from the Committee on Administration, a resolution amending the employee handbook regarding total base wage and other forms of compensation. I need a motion.
I so move, Mr. Chair.
Supervisor, was that Supervisor Headland?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Mr. Hudson, I do move.
Okay, Supervisor Headland moves, second.
Mr. Leno.
Supervisor Leno seconds. Speaking to the resolution,
I can address that.
Mr. Miller.
This is a housekeeping item.
We previously made a movement in post-employment benefits to a 401A from another post-employment benefit plan. And what this does is replace the reference to the OPEB with a reference to the 401A that we are now implementing.
Any questions, discussion? Seeing none, I think we'll try a voice vote with this one. So all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Resolution passes. Moving on to 9B2, resolution amending the inventory of job classes. Supervisor Headland,
Yes, Mr. Chair, I would so move that we pass this resolution.
Supervisor Story
second.
seconds.
Supervisor Story seconds. Speaking to this, Mr. Miller.
Yes, this is another housekeeping measure. We have a job classification for psychiatric social worker, but a social worker actually requires a certification that this position does not require. So it's changing it from psychiatric social worker to licensed clinical therapist.
Any questions? I see no hands raised. Okay, we'll do a voice vote on this one also then. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. All right, moving on. 9C from the Facilities Committee. 1, resolution approving an amendment to the lease with Red Cedar Racing. Supervisor Maves moves. And a second, Supervisor Neoff seconds. Speaking to the resolution, Supervisor Maves.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's pretty well self-explanatory as you read through it. This was negotiated here again because of the COVID-19 and the cancellation of the race season this year. So I guess I'll open it up if anybody has any questions because it is pretty self-explanatory.
Any questions? I don't see any hands raised. If not, we'll do a voice vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Moving on to 9C2, resolution approving an amendment to the lease with the Menominee Youth Hockey Association. Supervisor Maves moves. Supervisor Neoff seconds. Speaking to the resolution, Supervisor Maves.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Here again, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's straightening out some words and verbiage that was used wrong in years past. So it's housekeeping on part of it, and it's also getting the rent that the Menominee Youth Hockey Association pays per year straightened out because there was some conflicting statements there. So here again, it's pretty self-explanatory, and I'll open it up for questions if anybody has any.
Any questions? Supervisor Rogers.
Well, I don't believe the amendment is in the best interest of the county. We're charging racing $7,500 as of 2023, but we're going to lower our rent to hockey down to $1 a year. And the agreement was never brought to lower it back to 1. It's never come in front of the board to say that. So I don't agree that it's necessarily a housekeeping issue on changing the rent back down to $1 a year. Hockey they have complete control of multiple buildings for 11 months out of the year. That includes the cattle barn and a couple others, and they use them for the cattle barn strictly for rental income. They rent out storage space in the building for income in the winter, while the county has their equipment, the highway equipment and heavy equipment sitting out in the weather rusting, which we've had discussion about building a new building to put that in. But yet we continue to rent this out for $1. The original intent of the lease was so they could have a second building for ice. And that's no longer feasible, and they no longer use it for a second building of ice, strictly as an income building. There are many other clubs in the county that could also utilize that 4-H, FFA, horse clubs, all kinds of other organizations that could use that as well. I realize it's in the lease, but before we lower the rent back down to $1, why don't we at least have the conversation with them and see if they would be willing to return the use of that cattle barn back to the highway or back to the county so that we could utilize that before we just arbitrarily lower rent to $1 a year. So I guess that's my point, and I don't support the amendment.
Any other questions or speaking to it?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Supervisor Kinnear.
I would just like to hear Supervisor Mave's response to Supervisor Rogers, if you don't mind.
You, by all means, Supervisor Maves, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. When I referred to the housekeeping, that was actually just a reference to 4-1 when they were talking about the parcel A's and the parcel B's. So those were the terminology that had gotten labeled wrong way back when the city put in the holding pond on the west side of 17th Street there. So that was the housekeeping thing, is to get that straightened out. As far as the rent, we have had discussions with hockey in the past about it, and they bring up a good point. But the Hockey Association also has stuck a lot of money in those buildings. So it's and at the end of the lease, which I know is a long ways away, those buildings will come back to the county. So I understand Supervisor Rogers' concern. He does make a valid point. It would be a place to store our highway equipment if we did have the buildings. But this was an agreement that is been discussed, and this is where it's at now. So tonight to vote how you feel on what's presented before you.
Thank you, Supervisor Maves.
You're welcome.
Supervisor Quinn, you have a question?
Yes, in light of what Supervisor Rogers' point, which I think is also a valid point, I wonder if Supervisor Mays would give any consideration to have, since that, I don't think that's been part of the discussion with the Hockey Association, yet it seems like it probably should be. Would Supervisor Mays and his committee give any thought to reconsidering the lease with regard to at least that item, or is it too late to do that, in their opinion?
Supervisor Maves.
If I may, I would like to ask corporate counsel to respond to that, because it is my understanding the lease aspect of it is in play right now. So I would refer to the corporate counsel.
Yeah. Okay, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. there currently is a lease in place, and a couple of years ago, the facilities committee, or the chair of the facilities committee, the county board chair, the county manager, the facilities director, and the public works director, we started a dialogue with the Hockey Association to try to negotiate or renegotiate a lease. The purpose was to try to clean up a few things that needed to be cleaned up, try to clarify responsibility for utilities in certain areas, and try to handle the things that weren't included in the lease that suddenly became relevant. One of them was, for example, what happens to the property if the county board should decide to sell the rec park. And so after I'm going to say between 12 and 15 meetings over the course of a couple of years, we had a proposed lease agreement that included a lot of the provisions that some of you are asking about, and some that you aren't. But it was determined at the facilities committee meeting that not to advance the completely revised lease forward, because it included provisions that it was felt, and I think reasonably so, that there wouldn't be political support for them, and it involved finance, and so we were left with a need to correct the error of describing the parcel where the retention pond is, and the issue of rent. The issue of rent comes from, at one time, the Hockey Association had rent of $1 per year. When the county owned bleachers that were in the building, and there was some dispute about who owned them. It was determined that the county owned the bleachers. The Hockey Association, in order to improve the facility and along with all of the other improvements that they were making, raised funds and obtained significantly better quality, bigger bleachers than the ones that the county had in there. We had these kind that you could, probably 4 guys could lift them up and carry them out into the yard to get them out of the way, because that building where the ice is at was used as the commercial building at the fair. It's where booths were set up, and you see the people who have the stuff to stop fog from on your mirrors, and all kinds of things. The bleachers, the new bleachers, intruded into the space significantly, and so the rent was adjusted from $1 a month to I don't have an amount in front of me, but like $1,200 or $1,300, something like that. Not month, year. It was adjusted from $1 a year to approximately $1,200 per year, in order to compensate the county for the loss of revenue that it experienced as a result of not being able to sell booth space during the fair. Once they finished the Finetti, the community room, the big room on the east end of the building, and I'm told this by our former county board chair, Steve Rasmussen, it was apparently agreed that because the loss of revenue was no longer an issue, because people could go in there also. So there was now this additional space that was available. It was agreed that the rent would go back down to $1. However, that was never written up, and it was never presented. And so that was just included in our negotiations. And along with this, I apologize for being lengthy, but there's some context here. Along with this, the county actually forgot to send bills to the Hockey Association at some point. So they did pay the increased rent for a couple of years. And then at about the time when the county said, the county agreed with the Hockey Association that the rent would go back to $1 a year, we stopped billing them. And so they didn't pay their rent for quite a few years. And this is, I guess it tries to resolve the issue of the past rent by setting the amount that's due and when it's due. And also, I guess, for lack of a better word, honors the county's agreement that never was formalized and brought to the county board. It is now, though. And so that's the background of the rent issue. As far as other aspects of the lease agreement, we can always engage again with the Hockey Association and try to attempt to resolve some outstanding issues. There are some I think they would like resolved, and there are some I'm sure that we would here at the county. And we can always do that. This tonight, you have a small contract, if you will, and there's really not the ability to change the terms of it. So you'll either have to vote to approve it or vote no and not approve it. So.
Thank you. Any other speaking too? If not, Mr. Rogers, you have your hand up again. Go ahead.
Well, part of it is we're distracting from the fact that agreement was never brought in front of the county board for approval. It was in a negotiation stage. So I disagree when you say that it was agreed upon to lower the rent to $1. It was negotiated into something that would have been brought to the county board and never was. So it was never approved. So it was never really set. They also, because we made a bad agreement years ago, doesn't change the fact that they were good negotiators, and more power to them. We have the opportunity to kind of hold on to this rent and use it in some negotiations in the future. If the barn they're not using, we would like to maybe negotiate to get back. If you give away all your negotiating power ahead of time, it's pretty hard to go into a negotiation and ask for something in return. So I reiterate that it just doesn't make sense to me on the behalf of the county that we agree to this at this time. I have no problem with the money that they've put into the Finetti building. My focus really isn't on the Finetti building, where they put all the money in and fixed it up, and they did a very good job, and they're doing great. My issue is with the cattle barn, that the only thing they use that for is to rent out space and use it as income. So they certainly have an increase in revenue generated through that barn that they can pay the rent. So, thank you.
Any other speaking?
Mr. Chairman.
Supervisor Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Supervisor Rogers makes a great point about that, what I call the dairy cattle or the beef cattle building, that animal large building. And that is a building that we could use and I'm wondering if maybe we should ask facilities to go back and at least let the Hockey Association know that we're interested in being able to utilize that building for our own equipment, and see how willing they are to listen to us and renegotiate, see, they should work with us as well as we want to work with them. So I think Supervisor Rogers makes a great point. I would like to see our facilities go back to them and and discuss with them what we're talking about now, and ask if we can renegotiate that use of that big dairy beef cattle building. Thank you.
Supervisor Kennedy, did you have
Yes.
comments? Go ahead.
Didn't the original lease, I can't remember how many years ago it was, but I remember hearing about it. Wasn't the original lease 25 years for $1 a year?
Yes.
And then it went to 50 years at $1 a year? Am I incorrect or not?
They could have it again for another 25.
Okay. And as far as the Finetti building or thing, that's all well and good that they raised money, you know, to fix that up. But the county also gave them $100,000 towards fixing that building up. So
You are
that's
correct.
Yes, that's all I wanted to say.
Okay, thank you. So any other discussion? Basically, I think what I see here as choices is if we vote yes, we approve it. And if we vote no, we basically don't approve it, and it ends up going back to committee and negotiations. Is that correct, Mr. Council?
It can be, if that's the direction of the board. Other options would include postponing it or just simply having a motion to commit it, to refer it to committee right now without further voting on the resolution.
Well, we have a motion and a second on the table, so that, I guess that's what I was wondering, what the correct procedure would be. It seems like we have to take care of this motion first.
Well, this is a pending question, and so the rules of parliamentary procedure would allow a motion, a subsidiary motion of committing or referring that sends a pending question back to the committee, so it can be investigated and put into better condition for the board to consider next time. So that's an option, or postponement is an option to put it off to another time.
Okay.
Otherwise, absent any of those votes, which would require a second, the vote would be on adopting the resolution approving the amendment.
All right. Supervisor Quinn.
I'd like to move that we refer this resolution back to committee for additional consideration.
And I would second that motion.
Second it.
All right. Supervisor Anderson spoke first, Supervisor Johnson. So can we do this one first then?
Well, a vote on this motion would extinguish the other action. So yes.
Right.
And for what it's worth, this is a debatable motion. So you may engage in discussion on the motion to refer.
Yep, I realize that. Any discussion on this motion to defer it back to committee?
Just purely a point of order, would it not be more correct to make the motion to table and refer back, or is just refer back sufficient?
I guess
it's sufficient.
Any other speaking to this motion?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes. Supervisor Bjork, go ahead.
Support the motion, and I guess sitting through all our discussions that we've had here tonight, the one thing that keeps popping into my mind is that county government has really tied their hands as far as hearing from the public wouldn't it be nice to hear from the Hockey Association prior to making a decision of this magnitude? And where we are, I suppose, for whatever reason, nobody shows up or no one's able to make a comment, and and it's this committee, that committee. It's a little confusing. It would be nice to hear from the parties involved.
So let me clarify for everybody, Supervisor Bjork, you said you support the motion. Do you support the second motion to defer it back to committee?
That is what I was referring to, yes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure everybody realized what you meant. Supervisor Quinn, do you still have?
Well, yeah, if I could, I just make the point. I know
Yes.
that the Facilities Committee has done a good job of maintaining open discussion with Hockey Association, and there are good relationships there. So this is not done. This is done as a way to sort of, encourage them to continue that debate and that participation, that citizen participation in the committee forum, which has worked pretty well. So.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
Mr. Chair?
Supervisor Maves.
Yes, I do have one question. With those that want to send it back to the committee, I'm wondering, what are they expecting? It's one thing to send it back, but without some sort of guidance. I mean, are they saying we want that building back, or or are they saying we want them to pay more money, or are they saying just get what you can get? If they don't give, then come back and tell us that they don't give anything. I guess I'm looking for a little direction as to what they're actually asking. I have no problem with it sending it back. Hey, that's why we're here discussing this. But I would like to have a little more direction as to what they're actually expecting. Because on the one hand, I hear we can use that building, we want the animal building back. On the other hand, I'm hearing, well, try to get more money out of them. So I guess I'm just, as a general question, asking, what are they actually asking?
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Well, all right, Supervisor Bjork.
Well, it's real simple in my way of thinking, is that you should be able to sit down with the people that are leasing the building out and find out what kind of income that building is generating, and what percentage of maybe that income that's generated should come back to the county. You don't have to put a dollar amount on it. I mean, if it's generating income for the Hockey Association, Dunn County ought to have a piece of the action. That's simple.
All right, Supervisor Rogers, you had, go ahead.
Yeah, I would like them to negotiate to try to get the use of that empty barn back.
All right.
And Mr. Chairman.
Supervisor Anderson.
Thank you. Yes, I understand Supervisor Maves, why you need some direction. I was only interested in following up what Supervisor Rogers said, that we could possibly need some use out of that large animal barn. Nothing to do with the hockey, with that facility. But I thought if your committee could go back and just say we had discussion regarding the use of that large dairy cattle, beef cattle barn for our use, and discuss it with them. That's what I'm saying, Supervisor Maves.
Okay, thank you. Supervisor Tripp.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As kind of a direction for Supervisor Maves, I would like some clarity on the equity involved in this contract. Before I vote yes or no on whether to approve the resolution authorizing the contract, I'd like to have some better understanding of who's getting what are the balances. I think, well, I can't remember who mentioned that when the lease is up, we will get the building and we will be the beneficiaries of the investment that the Hockey Association has made. I don't know how much that's worth. I don't know what it'll be worth. If I read this amendment correctly, the $1 rent goes till 2038. I'm assuming that's the remainder of that original 25-year contract. That seems like a long time to me. I understand that the Hockey Association would like that. But if I had some clarification on, I'd like to think that everybody was treated fairly, that the county was making maximum use of our opportunities here with the rec park, that the Hockey Association was getting a fair treatment and fair value for their investment. And I have trouble understanding that now. So if this is referred back to committee and you have the opportunity to develop some of that information, I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Supervisor Story.
I was there at the time that this was adopted initially, and I believe that our chairman was the chairman of the committee. And it has gone through a lot of different changes since then. However, it was my understanding from Supervisor Mave's explanation that this had already been discussed. So I guess I wondered if Supervisor Maves could let us know again where that was at. And also it seems to me that every year that those kind of groups that are affiliated with that committee also have to give a report, so that the financial reports that you all are referring to may be something that he already has. If not, it might be something that could be submitted to the board if it does come back, so that we all can be a part of that or be sent to us, or however it might be done. So I guess I just wanted clarification from Supervisor Maves as to what discussions had already taken place with this.
Supervisor Maves, do you want to respond to that?
Well, yeah, I guess actually there's been a multitude of discussions at different meetings about all this. As far as it is kind of a cumbersome saga as has gone through the years and everything. But I have no problem with taking it back up and talking to hockey again, and we will. I appreciate the directions that these supervisors have explained here. At least it gives me a path to follow. I guess that's all I can say, is that we will, if you want to send it back, we'll go back and you'll have a more detailed report. As far as Supervisor Storing, I got lost on your question about financial reports. Could you please help clarify that for me?
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
It seems to me that whether it's the Red Sea Racing Association or the people that are affiliated with the gun ranges, as well as the Hockey Association, that they all will give some kind of a report to your committee, or at least they used to on an annual basis. So I was assuming that maybe was still the practice, so that you were able to see what their financials were.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Supervisor Maves.
Yeah, they never actually tell us what their actual financials are, as far as like with racing and stuff, or with the ranges, as far as they have fundraisers and they make improvements, the different gun clubs and the different ranges in Boyceville, Colfax, and Menominee. They do a lot of the monies that they raise, they pour right back into the facilities. So that is, I do not have that at hand right now, so I cannot give you a report as to what their financial liabilities or where they're sitting. I guess that could be something that we can add to when they give their yearly reports to the committee. That is something we can ask and see what happens.
Any other speaking to this motion to defer it back to committee?
This is Supervisor Steen.
Supervisor Steen.
I call the question.
Any other speaking? If not, maybe we should have a roll call vote on this. It might be, so we know who votes how. So I'll ask for a roll call vote and have the clerk call the roll like she has on the previous votes.
And Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Supervisor Morehouse.
Simply clarifying question. We're voting on the subsidiary motion to return to committee.
Correct.
Yes.
Supervisor Morehouse,
Yes.
Supervisor Morehouse recorded as yes. Supervisor Niehoff,
Yes.
Supervisor Niehoff recorded as yes. Supervisor Prochnow,
Yes.
Supervisor Prochnow recorded as yes. Supervisor Quinn,
Yes.
Supervisor Quinn recorded as yes. Supervisor Rogers,
Yes.
Supervisor Rogers recorded as yes. Supervisor Score,
Yes.
Supervisor Score recorded as yes. Supervisor Steen,
Yes.
Supervisor Steen recorded as yes. Supervisor Story,
Yes.
Supervisor Story recorded as yes. Supervisor Tripp,
Yes.
Supervisor Tripp recorded as yes. Supervisor Vandermeulen,
Yes.
Supervisor Vandermeulen recorded as yes. Supervisor Vogel,
Yes.
Supervisor Vogel recorded as yes. Supervisor Zons,
Yes.
Supervisor Zons recorded as yes. Supervisor Anderson,
Yes.
Supervisor Anderson recorded as yes. Supervisor Bauer,
Yes.
Supervisor Bauer recorded as yes. Supervisor Gary Bjork,
Yes.
Supervisor Gary Bjork recorded as yes. Supervisor Larry Bjork,
Yes.
Supervisor Larry Bjork recorded as yes. Supervisor Calabrese,
Yes.
Supervisor Calabrese recorded as yes. Supervisor Hartung,
Yes.
Supervisor Hartung recorded as yes. Supervisor Headland,
Yes.
Supervisor Headland recorded as yes. Supervisor Jensen,
Yes.
Supervisor Jensen recorded as yes. Supervisor Johnson,
Yes.
Supervisor Johnson recorded as yes. Supervisor Kennedy,
Yes.
Supervisor Kennedy recorded as yes. Supervisor Kinnear,
Yes.
Supervisor Kinnear recorded as yes. Supervisor Crumry,
Yes.
Supervisor Crumry recorded as yes. Supervisor Keeter,
Yes.
Supervisor Keeter recorded as yes. Supervisor Lenow,
Yes.
Supervisor Lenow recorded as yes. Supervisor Maves,
Yes.
Supervisor Maves recorded as yes. Supervisor McCullough,
Yes.
Supervisor McCullough recorded as yes. Chairman Bartlett.
No. Motion passes to defer it back to committee. So that ends our business for the night. Are there any announcements?
Mr. Chairman,
Supervisor Anderson.
thank you. I am very pleased to remind and let everybody know that it is official. In early July, we did receive notice that Dunn County is now a broadband forward certified county. There are 11 in the state. You remember back some time ago, we became certified in telecommuter forward. Now that we are broadband forward certified, we can move ahead quickly with all of the providers, those installers of fiber and everything. And this is huge. And I'm so happy to be able to report to you. And I want to acknowledge the work that our planner, Bob Colson, did in helping to get this application through. And so we need some good news. I think this is awesome news. It's going to help us get broadband throughout all of rural Dunn County. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Rogers, you had an announcement? Your hand was up. Okay.
No, that was a mistake.
Mistake? Anybody else?
Just one question, please.
Supervisor Bjork.
And this would be for the county manager. I see where Eau Claire County is going to furlough like some employees to save money. Has that been discussed at all for Dunn County?
That wouldn't be appropriate to discuss that at this time, Mr. Supervisor Bjork. But I would ask you to reach out to the county manager to get your answer.
Okay, thank you.
September, we do not meet in August. So we've got a month off from county board meeting at least. And September meeting should be on the 16th, correct? Or is it going to be?
No, I think it's the October one.
October meeting, yeah. September meeting is on the 16th. The October meeting will be moved a week earlier. So it's the September meeting is on the third Wednesday like normal, which would be the 16th. So we will see you at our next county board meeting in September. Thank you for all participating.
Miss you all at the picnic that we're not having.
Yes, yes. And I guess another announcement, you probably all have seen, but the WCA canceled the convention this week. So stay safe, stay healthy, and we will see you. Good night.
Bye, everybody. Good night.
Good night.
Good job, Dave.
Yeah.